Welcome back to the Wellness on Purpose podcast. If you're new here, our intention is to provide you with impactful, educational, and realistic information to help you progress on your journey to live wellness on purpose now and for future generations. This podcast is brought to you by Joanne's Place Health Foods, which is located in Peterborough and Lindsay, Ontario. My name is Marissa Laughlin. I am a holistic nutritionist and your host for the podcast. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the Wellness on Purpose podcast. It's officially December, which means the holidays are right around the corner. I know for myself, I tend to overindulge during the holidays with sweets like candy cane, hot chocolate, peppermint bark, holiday cookies, and all of the good foods because it really is the time to enjoy good company and delicious food. Am I right? But I know from personal experience what comes after the indulgence is a big old blood sugar spike and then drop. That blood sugar drop typically leaves me feeling fatigue, brain fogginess, irritated, and craving more. But I know that there are a few things that can be done to help regulate my blood sugar to reduce these symptoms. I've asked two amazing experts to join me today to talk more about blood sugar regulation. So let's welcome them onto the podcast for today. So our first guest on the podcast today is Diana Gifford-Jones. Good morning, Diana. How are you today?
I'm very well, Marissa. Thank you. Like everyone else, I'm looking forward to the holidays ahead, and I would like to thank you for having me on the podcast again. I hope all's well with you too.
Yes, everything is great. Thank you so much for coming back onto the podcast. We had some really great feedback from when you were on our podcast in September when you talked about osteoporosis. So thank you so much for coming back onto the podcast. So for our listeners, in case you missed it with that podcast, I will leave it in the description below for you to check out. But we have Diana joining us today to talk a little bit about some really long-standing Gifford-Jones messages on lifestyle issues that we're facing today. But before we dive into those details, can you share with our listeners a little bit about yourself, your father's legacy, and also why you endorse certified naturals?
Happy to, Marissa. I've had a 30-year career to date in health, and it began with a decade at the World Bank in Washington, D.C., where I worked alongside many of the world's top authorities on global health and nutrition. I then went to the Conference Board of Canada in Ottawa, where my work pertained to health issues here in Canada. For example, I headed up a national roundtable on the social and economic determinants of health, and other executive networks on chronic disease prevention and management, on health system design, and on environmental health. And I'm now back in global health, working at an international health sciences university. But I think your listeners will know me as Diana Gifford-Jones, my pen name, following in the footsteps of my father, Dr. W. Gifford-Jones. I think many people will be well aware of his work. He's now in his 98th year, and he sends his very best to his readers listening in. He's looking forward to making a visit also to Joanne's Place sometime soon, Marissa. And I would just say that he has been championing no-nonsense health in his weekly health column for the past 45 years. And we're now co-writing that column together. It continues to be published weekly in newspapers across Canada and the US, and also on our website. You know, my father, he's long recommended products that he deems are sensible and safe and effective, and he has repeated relentlessly for years that people need to avoid reliance on prescription pharmaceutical drugs and alternatively address health issues they may be facing through natural means and get to the roots of their health problems. And that often means prevention, but also solutions to health problems that are readily addressed by natural approaches. So Marissa, we've endorsed the Certified Naturals line of products for exactly this reason. I'll end this sort of rather lengthy introduction just by saying that we'll be talking about the Certified Naturals glycemic control today. It's a really good example of a product that embodies this Gifford-Jones philosophy of natural health. So once again, thanks for having me on and for this chance to join Jocelyn in sharing information with your listeners.
Yes, and really looking forward to learning more about that product. So our second guest is brand new to the podcast. His name is Jocelyn Berube. Good morning, Jocelyn. How are you today? Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Marissa. I'm very happy to be here today. I'm doing well. And it's a pleasure to join you all, join Diana as well, to talk about glycemic control from certified naturals. It's a product that is absolutely essential, I think, entering into this very unique and special time of the year, but especially now as we are emerging from the pandemic, I think it will be even more special to everyone. So thank you for having me, and I hope you're doing well as well.
Yes, I am doing well. Thank you so much. And I'm really looking forward to learning more from you because you're a raw material expert. So, can you tell our listeners what exactly that means and what your connection to certified naturals is?
Well, actually, I'm from a Quebec-based company. We are manufacturers of ingredients that go into the formulations of finished products. So certified naturals is actually using one of our ingredients as the core component in their certified natural glycemic control product. So we are the ones that have developed the whole scientific package, the whole scientific data that support the efficacy of that particular ingredient. As a result, we like to support our clients, the companies that we partner with, towards learning how to use the product, how to use it properly, and what are the benefits from it. So that's one of the key link that we have with certified naturals. But we're very excited also because we, as a Canadian company, we like to promote and make sure that our products are available to as many Canadians as possible. This product is actually issued, coming from years of research in our facilities, in our labs, in Canadian universities as well. We harvest those seaweeds in Canadian waters. We transform it in Canada, and we sell it to Canadians now through a Canadian partnership with Certified Natural. So we are very proud to have that product available, and as it is a product that is entirely made and originating from Canada.
That's amazing because I know Canadian products is, obviously very important to Canadians when buying, but what we know in terms of raw materials, we can just trust a little bit better in Canadian ingredients and raw materials as well. So that's fantastic. Thanks again for both of you for joining us today. And let's get talking about the holidays and glycemic index and all of those good things. So we know the holidays are right around the corner, and during the holidays, I can speak for myself on this part. My daily routine, it tends to change, and it doesn't always align with what my current or year-long wellness goals are. Over the holidays, I might consume more things that I wouldn't eat on a regular basis, maybe a little bit more sugar. And I also might take a break from my daily routine of movement as well. So Diana, do you think that we should be stressed about moderation in our lifestyle over the holidays? Or do you think it's okay to be taking a break from things and celebrating over the season?
I really hope we don't get stressed about moderation, because I think that's the main message, and moderation hopefully is a de-stressor for people. If anything, we should experience stress when we're exceeding moderation. But it is the holiday season, and people will enjoy the festivities, and that's a good thing. It's just we need to be careful about what we do and the way the things we eat and the things we do. I want to tell you that, since 1974, Marissa, there's been a weekly column penned by Gifford-Jones, and people can see all these columns. They're on our website at www.gif.com. So doc, D-O-C, gif, GIFF.com. We've posted 1,200 of them to date, and we have another 1,200 more of the older legacy columns to be posted soon. And it really is a remarkable record of the health issues of the day. And I encourage people to have a look and use the search function to find articles that have relevance to their interests. Listeners and readers of the column will find a consistent message there, an unwavering message. And that is that whether it's the holidays or it's at any other time of year, the number one rule is to adopt a healthy lifestyle. And the second part of that rule is to do it early in life as possible. So teach your children well. And the third part of the rule is stick with it. So even in times when the situation calls for celebration and good times, don't let that be a moment when you deviate such from these principles of good, healthy living that you damage your health. A little celebration over the holidays is in order, but it's a good idea to build those healthy habits, to live by them on a daily basis and to stick with them. So sure, a little fun, Marissa. And if that involves some sweets, we're all going to talk a little bit today about what happens when we overindulge in those sweet products.
Yeah, I love that message. And it really is creating that lifestyle, not just in 1 week, 1 year. It's like you said, starting young, creating that healthy, balanced routine for yourself that just, it becomes your norm. It doesn't seem like work for you. It just becomes what's natural. So I love that. And then it also helps when you have that foundation in place that you don't feel like you stray too far from that over the holidays, because that's what you're used to. That's what you're naturally doing. So I love that. And we'll tag the website below so people can go and read some of those articles. So for the people, including myself, who are going to overindulge in some sugar and maybe even just more carbohydrates than people are used to over the holidays, this can be a slippery slope. But how big of a problem are we actually facing when we are giving in to these indulgence more than we should be?
Well, we'll hear from Jocelyn in a minute about what happens to us individually, but let me just sort of dampen the mood a little bit with some sad statistics. So forgive me for this, but we're already seeing in North America now 1 out of 10 people has diabetes. And I'm going to stick with the statistics on diabetes, Marissa, because it's really the condition that will be at the focus of today's discussion. We know that about 65 years ago, 95% of diabetics in the world were diabetics due to genetic issues. In other words, people born with type 1 diabetes. And only 5% of diabetics were becoming diabetics as a result of obesity or other lifestyle factors associated with type 2 diabetes. But today, it's the exact opposite. We've got just 5% of the global population with type 1 diabetes and 95% with type 2. Some predictions show that by 2050, rather than 1 in 10 people with type 2 diabetes, it'll be 1 in 3. And think about this for a second. Today, the cost of care for people with diabetes, it amounts to about 230 billion annually. 230 billion annually. And that number is going to go up if the incidence of diabetes goes up. And we simply can't afford the escalating costs in our economy or in economies around the world where diabetes is also manifesting at continuously higher levels all the time. Now, in terms of the human toll, there are 463 million people worldwide with diabetes, and about 4.2 million die of it each year. So we'll talk today also about prediabetes. It's a term that people may not be as familiar with, but it's an important condition that people need to begin to focus on. In the US, for example, we have about 34 million diabetics and another 88 million people with prediabetes. So I hope some of these statistics give you a bit of a sense of the problem, Marissa. It's not a small problem.
No, it's not. And I'm really grateful you brought up forward some of those statistics, because I think that can be an eye opener for a lot of people. As you said, that higher majority of people are type 2 diabetes. And what we know is a lot of that is driven by lifestyle and dietary habits. So if that's what's driving that number up, what we're going to talk more about today is how we can bring that number down and prevent that from happening. Because my fear is that with the pandemic happening, and it's still happening, but so many people's lives adjusted because of limitations and restrictions. People became more sedentary. So I'm just not sure if we're going to see a spike and then a drop, or if we can start to see that drop happen. So I'm staying hopeful for that for sure. So you've written a series of articles recently on diabetes and glycemic control. Can you give us a snapshot of what those main messages are in the articles for our listeners?
Yeah, Marissa, thanks. The main message really is that we need to drive some kind of a change here. We do need to drive a change. And the first strategy must be to drive societal change and individual change, all in the service of creating healthier lifestyles for people. I'm not going to go into the societal changes, but we all do need to pay more attention to those as well. But among individuals, we need to drive home the message that people need to eat healthier diets, and they need to get more exercise. And as I said, the evidence shows that we're not very good as individuals in making either of those things happen. We're certainly not good at driving those societal changes that need to happen either. but individuals simply aren't making the changes to their diets, and they aren't getting out to exercise more. Obesity rates are going up. Healthy lifestyles are not easy for people to adopt sometimes. So I think the remainder of the discussion today is going to be really interesting, because Jocelyn is going to help explain some of the alternative approaches that people can take to managing glycemic control that can be accommodated in this reality that we're facing, that there will be holiday seasons, there will be day-to-day behaviors that people follow that are not the healthiest choices in terms of diet and exercise. And I think we've got a bit of a solution here that's worth everyone listening to.
Absolutely. So let's get back to talking about the basics of blood sugar regulation, because I think when people think about blood sugar, they automatically think diabetes or somebody who does suffer with diabetic condition, but that isn't necessarily true. When we are talking about blood sugar irregulation, what exactly is happening in the body when the blood sugar is fluctuating? When we hear that things spike and things drop, what is actually going on in the body, Jocelyn?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Marisa. And before talking about irregulation, I will try to just set the tone on what is blood sugar regulation, because that's basically the main energy driver in our body. That's where we get our energy from. So whenever we eat foods, that food has to be absorbed, has to be digested by our digestive tract, so that we can get the nutrients from the food. And then those nutrients, that can be amino acid from protein, it can be fatty acids from fat, it can be glucose from carbohydrates, or it can be just vitamins and minerals, but all of these nutrients will then be transported to the bloodstream, and the bloodstream will then bring those nutrients to our cells and various organs and tissues in our body. So you have to see the bloodstream as a highway where there's traffic. There can be more traffic or less traffic. And if you're looking, for example, for carbohydrates, they will be all broken down to glucose, which is the main sugar that we absorb from these carbohydrates. So, for example, after a meal, if you had a bowl of pasta or rice, carbohydrates that are complex will be digested to glucose, and then a lot of glucose will be transported to your bloodstream after that meal, and that means that glucose will go up in your bloodstream afterwards. So that's something that we can measure with a glucometer. You can find that your blood sugar level is going up after a meal. Now, what happens is that the body will start using that glucose for different reasons, for different uses. It will convert it to energy. It will use it for muscular contractions, for brain function. It will use it for many different things. It will also use it to restore its energy stores. So, for example, glycogen in muscle is a kind of carbohydrate that we accumulate and that will help bring you energy in times of heavy muscular efforts. And then it will make also some fatty acids out of that glucose. So it will convert glucose into fat, and it will accumulate that energy for longer term storage in fat cells. So that's how the body uses that glucose afterwards. One reason and one challenge that the body is facing is that it needs glucose at all time in the bloodstream, because our brain only feeds on glucose for its function. It cannot use fatty acids. It cannot use any other types of energy source that our body can normally use. It has to have a constant flow of glucose to be able to function properly. So every time in our bloodstream, there's a steady flow of glucose, and that is coming from the various stores that I've spoke about, like the glycogen store mainly. So we have that constant flow of glucose, but what happens after a meal is that glucose goes up because of the digestive influx, what comes from the digestion. So glucose is needed, but it's also dangerous. The body doesn't behave well when there's high glucose. Why? Well, first of all, glucose is triggering oxidative stress, because glucose is the main source of energy. So when there's a lot of glucose, there's a lot of energy production from that glucose. And obviously, energy is obtained from glucose through a kind of electronic transfer that is really similar to what happens when we are burning wood, for example. So we are really burning that glucose inside our cells, but that creates some oxidative stress. And because there's so much glucose, then there's some free radicals that can escape our natural protection mechanisms. And that's why we are seeing some oxidative stress after meals. In fact, oxidative stress is not coming from pollution, is not coming from the environment or ozone or any type of chemical production. The main source of oxidative stress in our body is our production of energy from glucose. So that's something that's very important to understand. The second reason why glucose is dangerous for our body is that it will form a complex with protein, glycated hemoglobin. Glycated hemoglobin is simply a hemoglobin molecule that has been attached with a glucose, and that is a very good marker to follow the glycemic status of diabetic persons. But glycation can occur on any other protein in our body. For example, collagen can be glycated. And when collagen is glycated, it is, not flexible. It is not able to be repaired by the body. And that's one reason why people that have high blood glucose tend to look older than they are. So that is a very important thing also to understand, is that the body needs to protect against high blood glucose, because that's essentially breaking down some of the structures and functions of the body. So when we have meals that have a lot of carbohydrates, a lot of easily accessible carbohydrates, and that will tie into the types of food that we should eat later on. But when we have some food that have a lot of very easily accessible carbohydrates, this blood glucose response after a meal is exaggerated. It's going very high, and the body has to release a lot of insulin as an emergency to take the blood glucose low as fast as possible, because when it's high, it is problematic. So that's how the blood sugar can get, why it is so important to keep it within the healthy boundaries that we're seeing right now. So the regulation is very important. Obviously, there's many reasons why we're seeing irregulation. One of them is the choice of food that we're having. Now, a lot of the food that we have right now is filled with carbohydrates, filled with added sugar, added starch or maltodextrins, and other types of carbohydrates like that. And the reason for that is that the food manufacturers have tried to make us some food that is healthier in appearance. They have provided low-fat foods for decades now, but when they remove fats, they essentially created foods that were tasteless and textureless. So adding carbohydrates basically gives back that taste and texture, and you can claim that you have a low-fat, healthy type product for your consumer, and you sell a lot of that. So the reason, the result is that we're now eating a lot more carbohydrates than we should. So every meeting occasion, not just the holiday season, where of course we will have some pie and have some, enjoy some of the fun that food can provide, but every meal occasion now is filling us with carbohydrates, and that's a large reason why we're seeing some irregulation in people's today.
A lot of good points there. The first thing I want to circle back to is you talked about oxidative stress and also aging as well. Are there any other short or long-term effects that someone can be potentially prone to when they have irregular blood sugars? Aside from becoming diabetic, is there anything else that our listeners should be mindful of?
Oh, for sure. Well, for example, I mentioned that brain will feed only on glucose. So again, brain has a need for a certain level of glucose, but very surprisingly, after a meal, if you had a large meal, and for sure everyone will experience that once in their life, they have a large meal, and after that they feel sleepy. The reason for that is very simple, is that brain actually needs glucose. There's a lot of glucose, but insulin is high at the same time. So insulin will drive blood glucose down very intensively after meals, and you will eventually fall into a small period of hypoglycemia. So that's low blood glucose. That's a time where actually your brain starts having some problems to function properly. So you have challenges remaining focused on your work, even keeping your eyes open. That's one of the reasons. And the other consequence of that is that you will be driven to eat again some unhealthy food. So you're 2 hours after your meal, you're in front of the vending machine trying to get a quick snack. The other reason for that is that the brain will also be flooded with some amino acids that are co-transported by insulin. So, for example, tryptophan will be transported to the brain, and tryptophan will be converted to serotonin and melatonin. So those are other factors that will induce a sleep cycle after your meal. So brain function is heavily controlled by the levels of our blood sugar, and steady flow of sugar is important. But if you have very large peaks that are followed by dips, then you end up having some cravings, and obviously it can lead to weight gain, can lead to unhealthy longer term complications.
Okay, can we talk about actually that correlation between blood sugar irregularities and weight gain?
Yes, actually, blood sugar is controlled by insulin. So insulin being the hormone that our body secretes to make sure that we are using blood sugar, that we are, that's the signal to say for all of the cells of the body, okay, there's just have been food. So now we need to make reserves. So it is called an anabolic hormone. So it's a hormone that tells our body to build. So for example, that hormone, the insulin, will help our muscle uptake amino acids for making proteins and building muscle mass. So that's an important aspect of it. Another factor is that insulin will tell our fat cells to uptake fatty acids. So it will also tell our fat cells that we have just had food and there's probably some fatty acids in the bloodstream that you can uptake. So that's a building hormone. So whenever you're having foods that trigger large insulin release, it places your body in a state where it facilitates weight gain at all levels. It facilitates, accumulation of fat. It facilitates the use of carbohydrates and the use of glucose for storage. So the body will basically convert more glucose into fatty acids and fat more effectively when there's high insulin compared to when there's a lower insulin level. And the other aspect of that is that we have actually a limited amount of insulin that we can produce over a lifetime. So if we are stimulating insulin release to a higher level after every meal, then we're getting closer to the risk of having less and less insulin left to produce for the meals that are coming, and that's not a good sign for long-term health maintenance.
So do you think that diet alone can support blood sugar levels? And if you do you have a recommendation for our listeners as to what diet you think is best for someone to follow?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, the problem is that we just have too much of sugar right now. So for my whole own life, I'm trying to stick to a whole food diet. I'm cooking a lot of our own foods. And that's what the choice I've made to try to control what I put in my body. As soon as you're going out for eating, as soon as you're taking food that is coming from a box, that's coming from something that has been prepared for you, you're taking the risk that a lot of that, the normal composition and optimal composition of that food has been changed in some way that makes your body a more easy access to those carbohydrates. And that is the reason why our body cannot react well to those foods. One of the example that I can give you is bread, for example. If you're taking bread, most of the bread will be added with carbohydrates because it's just making the whole manufacturing of the bread faster. You add some sugar in the bread so the yeast can work immediately and make your dough rise faster. Wherever if you're not adding sugar, you have to wait 2-3 days that the dough will the yeast will cut the carbohydrates that are naturally present in the bread, and that will now make the dough rise. So those are the steps that the food industry is making to speed up their process, having low cost foods and things like that. But that's not good for our health. So these carbohydrates, unfortunately, remain in the product at the end. So when your digestive system tries to digest those carbohydrates, they are not protected inside the grain. They are not protected behind some fibers or associated with proteins that are making it harder for our digestive system to digest carbohydrate. They are very easily accessible. So the body has a very easy job to cut all of these carbohydrates, generate a lot of glucose, and that glucose will ultimately reach the bloodstream all at once. Now, I remind you that glucose is dangerous. It creates some problems inside our body. So it's exactly like what happens after a big rainfall. We've seen that on the West Coast recently. All of that rain that fell into 1 or 2 days created those landslides and created those problems. If that same amount of rain had fallen over a month, there would have been no problem at all. So that's the same thing with insulin. Our body has a capacity to manage glucose with a small amount of insulin after every meal if that glucose is hidden in our foods, is in their natural configuration. It's part of the whole food that you had at first. But if the food is filled with sugar and filled with carbohydrates that are just added there, very easy to access, then that large amount of glucose all get into the bloodstream very rapidly after a meal. And that is the emergency situation that the body doesn't want to see.
Yeah. And I feel like a lot of people's diets are heavily relied on for carbohydrates, and carbohydrates aren't bad by any means. It's in moderation, and also the form of carbohydrates, because having, bread and packaged and processed foods, as you said, looks very different to having like a sourdough type of bread that's been fermented over a few days. So there's a big difference between that. And I think the bottom line is, when we are looking at our diet, it needs to be driven by whole foods that you make yourself, foods that are in its own natural state. It hasn't changed in any which way, except for whatever you decide to do with it, whether you roast it or so on from there. So we know that carbohydrates are a big game player in impacting our blood sugars to cause irregularities in spiking and dropping. But are there any specific foods that you should be pairing those carbohydrates with to help lessen the blood sugar regulation? Or is there other foods that you should just make sure you have a lot of in your diet to help balance that out?
That's an interesting question, but not an easy one to answer, because actually food needs to be diverse in its nature. So you need to get a lot of everything. And you need to focus on foods that are rich in fibers. Fibers will basically slow the work of your digestive tract, make it harder for the enzymes and the work to be done for digestion. So again, fiber-rich foods will help have these effects. But again, if you're sticking to whole foods, those foods are naturally rich in fibers more than highly transformed foods, which usually is the fibers have been taken out or transformed in some way. So that's basically the bottom line guidance for that would be to stick to whole foods, fiber-rich food that will make the work more challenging for your digestive tract to gain access to the carbohydrates. And obviously sticking to these whole foods that you cook yourself, you know what you put in there, you know that you can add sugar if you like it, but you know the amount that you're putting in there.
Yeah, I just want to add, Jocelyn, how hard it is for people to do what we're suggesting here, though, because so many people are not, the owners of their destiny in what they eat day by day. They're dependent on what they can get on the fly or what somebody else is preparing, who may not be in their own family and may not be caring about whole food approaches. So, I think that's what's really interesting about the product that we're talking about with the glycemic control, is that we're giving people a chance to kind of get the benefits of the perfect diet without actually living by it personally, because of the challenges that are inherent in the way we're all living these days. Most people don't have the chance to cook their own meal.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a huge part of why we are seeing such a rise in diabetes and other health conditions as well, too, is accessibility. Not everybody does have the opportunity to do that. But I think, too, on the opposite side of that is people also have to want to make the change and prioritize to do that change for themselves. And they really need to start advocating for their own health. And that might start with cooking more of their own meals, or just even simply start by reading your ingredient list, just to be mindful of, you might be eating more of a packaged, processed food based diet, but as soon as you start to look at what those foods are and maybe just become a little bit more aware, it might be smaller changes that you're making, which I think is a great step. But for those people who maybe can't make that transition right away or aren't willing to make changes to their diet, There is a product that's new to the market by Certified Naturals. So I would love for you to expand a little bit more about that product, what the benefits are, who should take it, what's in it, and all of the goods with that.
Yeah, I can talk to you in length about Certified Naturals glycemic control. As I mentioned, we are the provider of the core ingredient in the product, and that core ingredient is actually a brown seaweed extract. Now, this brown seaweed extract will be acting inside your digestive tract to slow down the rate of digestion of carbohydrates. So it makes your body less able to digest carbohydrates at a high rate. So the glucose that you get from the food, instead of having it all at once after your meal, all in a very short time period, you get it over a longer time period, over the hours after your meals. And so your body will not react with having a large insulin spike. It will not react having those damages and problems that we have described earlier. It will react in a much more healthy way, and it will basically help to sustain long-term glycemic health in everyone. So we are very proud of that ingredient. As I mentioned, we manufacture the ingredient from seaweeds that we harvest in the Canadian coasts. And the product will be low in iodine. So that's a very important thing. When we are talking about brown seaweeds, for example, they are very rich in iodine. So people that have thyroid problem, they can be afraid of taking those ingredients. Now here we have a seaweed extract that has been washed out of its iodine content in a way, the biotechnology process that we're using to wash out the iodine. So you get just a little amount of iodine that is safe for anyone to use. So people can use it irregardless of their thyroid status. They are entitled to use the product. So the product will work on this digestive process by slowing down mainly two enzymes. The first one is called alpha amylase. So alpha amylase is the enzyme that our body will produce in its digestive tract to break down starch. So starch needs to be broken down to glucose. It's a big molecule that you find in bread, that you find in pasta, and other types of vegetables. Now, starch will be broken down to glucose very effectively normally after your meal. Now, what we do with this seaweed extract is that we can basically slow down the activity of that digestion step, making starch less of a problem in your food. And the same thing goes with table sugar, for example. So table sugar needs another enzyme. It's called alpha glucosidase. Well, the seaweed extract also slows down alpha glucosidase. So we are slowing down the two main carbohydrates that we find in our diet and that are responsible for the challenges that we just talked about. So the product has been tested in several human clinical trials. For example, when people were eating a white bread meal, so a source of starch, using the product led to a reduction of 48% in the size of the the blood glucose response to that meal. So basically it cut in half the peak of blood glucose that occurred after a meal. So that's a very important feat if you want to maintain long-term health, that you are able to reduce that blood sugar peak by half, is basically reducing the damages that you get from your glucose, so reducing the glycation. You reduce also the oxidized stress that you get from that blood sugar peak. And you also at the same time reduce the amount of insulin, so you are sparing the amount of insulin that you are using for future considerations.
And is this product suited for everyone, including people who are diabetic and on medication, or should they stay away from this product?
Well, actually, people can use it regardless of their use of medication, regardless of their use of or their glycemic status. We have been able to test that product in healthy people. We have tested it also in pre-diabetic people and in diabetic people, using or not using medication. So we have a broad range of clinical proof of efficacy, showing that the product can really help achieving better glycemic control. Now, obviously, people that take medication needs to control their health with their current medication. So that's not a replacement for any medication that people are taking, and that's something that I want to stress out. The studies that we have done do not indicate that we can remove medication with the use of the product, but it can really help bring a faster control to blood sugar levels with the use of the product, a better improvement in glycemic markers. For example, glycated hemoglobin will go down further with the use of certified natural product than without it. But it is very important that people understand that it will not replace either of their insulin or oral medication that they could be taking at the time.
Good to know. So we know, as we mentioned already, the holidays are right around the corner. And that's why I wanted to talk about this product on the podcast today, was because a lot of people tend to, including myself, overindulge in some sweets and carbohydrates. So I think this would be a really great product for people to start to implement into their routine through the holidays to help regulate their blood sugar. Why would you say this is important? And if it is a good idea, how would someone take it? Like, would they take it with those meals that they're having that are higher carbohydrates and sweet based, or is it something that's stabilized through the day?
Well, you really have to take it with your meal. So before your meal is the ideal time to take the product because it will only act on your following meal. That's a dynamic process. If you're taking the product in the morning, don't expect it to work for your diner, because it will be way too long between those two time periods. Your food will not be there at the time you need it. So you need to take the product with your meal. I suggest taking it 5 to 10 minutes before you start your meal. I personally recommend taking it over a long time period rather than taking it just when you have a bad meal, because the truth is that food has been enriched in carbohydrates and sugar so much in the past years that, like Diana mentioned, we have a hard time now knowing and abiding to a healthy diet, a healthy whole food diet, for example, because of lack of time, because we have so many social occasions, because we have the holiday season around the corner and things like that. So I recommend taking it before every meal of the day and have the maximum effect from that use over a 3 to 6 months time period. That would be my recommendation.
Thank you. I'm going to start taking this right away so that I can save myself through the holidays, because I know, for at least myself, and I know a lot of people could probably relate to this, is you kind of have that few weekends or a week that you have holidays, you overindulge, but then carrying into the new year, it's really hard to kind of get rid of those sweets, because after you have them once, your body starts to crave them again and wants that sugar. So I feel like by taking this product, it's going to help to stabilize that reaction even out through the new year, and really reduce the chances of kind of letting my goals fall by the wayside just from overindulging a few times over the holidays. So if our listeners are interested in following that type of protocol as well, please pop into one of our locations to learn more about that product and information about those. But Diana, I know you had a few closing remarks as well too about the product and what we talked about today. So would you like to share with our listeners?
I would, Marissa, thank you. I think one of the things that's hard to show on a podcast is the charts and the evidence, and it's that evidence that I've been looking at really closely. We all want to take decisions that are evidence-based, and as we write our column week by week, and certainly as we endorse products, we don't do that lightly. There's a lot of responsibility that comes with making recommendations around people's health, and the evidence for this glycemic control product, this brown seaweed, its use in these human clinical trials is astounding. In the column that we wrote recently, we challenged readers to take a look at the sort of the parameters for those studies and try and replicate them. So Jocelyn, maybe you could just remind everyone what were the parameters for the specific clinical trials that you undertook? And if somebody wanted to try to replicate the trial, what would they need to do? And then I would invite those people, Marissa, if they're interested in reporting back to me what they are able to achieve. And we might write a future column reporting out the details on what individuals are doing, whether they can replicate the trials or not.
Yeah, actually, we have 7 or 8 clinical trials, so obviously I can talk in length about each of them. But the one I'm particularly proud of is one of the latest that we have done in pre-diabetic people. And in this paper, there was actually people that were not using any type of medication. So they were really standard people that just have been surprised to hear that they have some challenges keeping their blood sugar in the healthy range. And that's something that a lot of people can relate to, because that's quite often an eye-opener that you get from your doctor. Well, your blood sugar is not where it should be. So these people that we had, we basically followed doctor's recommendations. So our patients were put on diet and exercise in both groups, in the placebo group, meaning the people that will not get an active product, as well as people that got the active brown seaweed product. And we put them for 3 to 6 months on the product, 1 capsule before each meal of the day. So they were able to control the blood sugar spike that they get from each of their eating occasions. And after 3 months, we were starting to see a reversion of pre-diabetic state. Some of them went from advanced pre-diabetes all the way to a light pre-diabetes. So they got an improvement but stayed in the pre-diabetes range. And some of them actually saw a reversion of their pre-diabetic state to a normal status. So I would be very interested to hear if people are willing to do that and try it for themselves. Stick to a good diet, stick to a good physical activity program, but try the addition of glycemic control product to make sure that you're putting your body in the best position possible to reduce the amount of insulin you need to produce after every meal, and that will basically spare your pancreas for a longer use of it for long term. That's what we're seeing. We're very excited about these results.
So Marissa, people can find more information about those studies, both on the Certified Naturals website and on our website. So I would encourage people to have a look and give it a try, because it certainly seems that this is a super, super smart way to go about reversing the course towards prediabetes and then diabetes. And so many of us are on that course, we know from the evidence. So there's every reason in the world you'd want to turn that pathway around if you can. And if you can do it through diet and exercise alone, congratulations, great job. That's the best course of action. If you need some medication, your doctor will advise you on that. But here's a natural approach that seems very, very effective, safe, easy, and showing terrific results.
Perfect. Well, thank you both so much for joining us today on the podcast and sharing your wealth of information. It's been such a pleasure. And I know that there's a lot of people in our community who are conscious about their blood sugar, whether they're pre-diabetic or they're diabetic. So they will definitely benefit from this episode. So thank you guys so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Marissa. Thank you. Have a wonderful, happy, safe, healthy holiday season.
Thank you, Marissa. Thank you as well, Diana.
Thanks again, Diana and Jocelyn, for joining us on the podcast today. If you guys are still with me, thank you guys so much for listening to today's episode. And if you want to learn more about the Certified Naturals glycemic control, please pop into one of our Joanne's Place locations and talk to one of our supplement specialists. All right, that wraps up today's episode, and you guys know what to do next. Be sure to hit subscribe to our channel so that you do not miss a notification as soon as a new episode is released, and be sure to continue to share on social media that you're listening to the Wellness on Purpose podcast.